Let's make some 1840s infant print gowns. Hi everyone, my name is Caitlin, and on my channel I teach old-fashioned sewing skills. And we've been working through a series of getting as many baby clothes done as I can before I get pregnant, so I am not overwhelmed with the fact that I do 1810 to 1885 and then 1910 to 1945. We're also starting 18th century. Anyway, that's a lot of work, so we're getting a head start. So we're going to make 2 print gowns, well, a print gown and then technically a plaid gown. This is not technically a print, it's a woven plaid. 2 patterned 1840s baby dresses. So I have here again, this is technically modern homespun, which looks and feels nothing like period homespun. I have a video on that, kind of. It's a myth coming out next month. So I do myth busting videos as well, once every other month. And the next one will include the differences between modern homespun and period homespun. It's not that it's inappropriate, it's just you can't call it homespun in the period. It's just a really cheap, poor quality fabric. And then I bought this off somebody. It's a out of print reproduction, and I have a lot of it. We're starting to get some really fun prints in the 1840s, so I'm looking forward to this. Alright, starting with this. Here we are. Okay, we're going to commence with the skirt. So I want the finished skirt to be about 27 inches long. Really between 27 and 30. Let's go ahead and cut it to be 30 inches long. So I'm looking at the Workwoman's Guide. And for the very first size, which is the very smallest infant, it should be 15 nails long, which is 33 inches long, which is quite long. And then for the 3/4 size, it's supposed to be 12 nails long, which is 27. And so I'm somewhere in between the 33 and the 27, and I'm wondering if I would like the shorter one, because when you think about it, a newborn's only about 18 to 20 inches long, but this doesn't include the head, which is roughly 5 inches. So say on the high end, that means 15 we get to an infant's feet. This is pretty far from that, and I feel that's pretty good. Okay. And then I want a nice deep hem, because if y'all been around long enough, y'all know I love myself some deep hems. I think they're beautiful. So let's do a 3.5 inch hem. It's a straight, this is a plain weave. We should be able to rip it. Now I am following the Workwoman's Guide's directions for infants' petticoats, because that's the style that I'm more going for. You see that a lot in like infants' clothing. We're just going to change the sleeves out for 1840s instead of 1830s. And it does say the skirt should be about 33 inches wide. This is 45. And because it's a dress skirt and not a petticoat, this is going to be fine. Alright, the Workwoman's Guide does say for a child at 18 months, it'll be 4.5 inches wide for a bodice. And about 4 inches for a newborn. So let's cut that down the middle maybe. I am so glad I measured that original. 1840s waist gets longer, which I knew. Which is part of the reason my brain went, maybe I should check on that. Yes, 5.5 inches. Now the fun thing about reproduction stuff is that it usually has this really nasty modern selvage, which would not have been in period fabrics. You can do one of two things. And I go back and forth by which ones I want to use. So you can either make it look period, or you can use the period method. And I think both are valid in their own right. So the period method would be to use the selvage. That way you don't have to finish any of the edges. It's a lot less work. So, and what that would entail is that you would leave the selvage and just make sure it's not seen from the outside. Now some people will cut off the selvage and just finish the edge. That way it looks period from the inside out. You don't see the modern selvage. And it varies on which one I do. And it also varies how bad the modern selvage is. This one is pretty thick, pretty white. It's very much a contrast from the fabric. And so I think I'm probably going to cut this off. Five and a half as before. And then my iron is ready to go. I will iron these out. We'll come back, cut sleeves. We're going to use my little sleeve pattern that I drafted from my original, and we're going to cut this out on a little bit of scrap fabric. first step, sewing skirt seams together. I always like to start the skirt, I think because it's the easiest. And I'm going to leave a gap at the very top and the back because obviously we got to get this on and off. I forgot, I sewed most of the other skirt together and I started from the top down and did not leave a gap, so I'm going to have to cut out some stitching. But that's what happens when you don't pay attention. And yes, in case you haven't figured it out, we are completely hand stitching this. Regular viewers will know my thing on why I choose to hand sew everything pre-1850. And it's a pretty arbitrary number that I came up with. It has a, well, it's based in historical evidence, but it's not a hard fact. The first sewing machine I know that was in Texas is 1847. So I used to say anything 1847 I would, you know, and over I would machine sew. I decided to give it a few more grace years. I really probably should be pre-1855, but I'm lazy, so I will enjoy my 1850 to 1855 sewing machine sewn garments. Thank you. And I'm going to show you what I'm going to do for this very bottom spot in just a moment, as soon as I get there. I'm going to take this edge and I'm going to fold it over about 3/8 of an inch-ish. There won't be much of a tuck, but there might be a small tuck. Actually, I'm going to make sure I match that plaid, and I'm just going to stitch that across. It will create a very small pleat in the back, but it's not noticeable. And now I won't have a gap. There's a placket now, without actually doing a placket. This is the easy mid-19th century way to do a placket, and it's my favorite thing. And while I still have a little bit of gray thread on my needle here, I'm going to start the hemming, but I'm only going to go as far as this thread goes, and I'm going to go back and do what I need to on the other skirt. With hemming, it is just what is now called a whip stitch. Back then it was called a hem stitch, for very good reason. Because this is how we hem things. I'm going to use that selvage to sort of do a felled seam all the way up, only because of that raw edge on the other side. So I'm going to just fold that down. It's a selvage. I don't need to turn it under. I could if I want to make the seam smaller, but that just seems like it's going to add a little bit of bulk. So I'm just going to whip this close. Not doing really nice stitches. I would if this was a true felling situation, but because I'm just trying to tack this down to hide a raw edge, I'm not going to do really nice work. I did better on the other one, but one thing I am currently working on and making my reproductions more in tune with the originals is making my seam allowances smaller. We like really large seam allowances in the modern era. Like, we like at least 1/2 inch. A lot of times we do 3/8 of an inch. And I don't see that on original garments. I'm seeing more like 1/8 or 1/4 inch seam allowances, except in very specific areas. Right under the arms of a woman's dress will usually be at least 1 inch, because you can use that for refitting. In the center front of a front opening gown, and even the center back of a back opening gown, basically where the gown opens, you'll see at least 1 inch turn under there. In bodices, I will see more like 1/2 inch seam allowances at least, but that's because you are expecting to refit things. But in things like skirts, I see most often very tiny seam allowances. With children's garments, I see a lot of very tiny seam allowances, and I'm trying to get myself to that point. Obviously, I'm not doing that right now. I did a lot better on the other skirt. Alright, so I showed you a little bit of the hemming. I'm showing you this. I showed you how to sew the thing together. I showed how the placket goes. Alright, I'm going to continue all of this, and then I will meet you back here for gauging. We'll do a little bit of gauging, and then we'll work on bodices and sleeves. Probably starting with the sleeves, because that sounds like fun. Gauging. You just gotta get yourself in a rhythm for this type of thing. And of course, your gauging stitches don't have to be perfect. Gauging itself hides a multitude of problems, and I've seen more originals that were not perfect than those that were close to perfect. When I get this done, the skirts will be 100% done. We can work on, I think, sleeves next. I also forgot that I need to cut bias to finish off the neck and the waist. So I went ahead and cut that just 2 inches by about 45 inches long. So I do need to seam that together. sleeves. So I'm going to put them right sides together. I'm going to do all of this seaming and then the whole hem all in one seam. Makes it a little bit easier on myself. So run up. This is a raw edge, so we are going to need to finish it. And most commonly it would be felling, although a mantua maker's hem would also be appropriate. And then on one end we're going to cut off half of it. Embroidery scissors are way better for this than actual cutting scissors, but this works too. Take that raw edge, fold it over, give myself that nice 1/8 inch seam allowance. I'm sure my regular subscribers will be have heard this before, but I always do like to point out, just for new people who may not have the understanding of period sewing, that when we talk about sewing by hand, you'll get a lot of people who tell you, oh, it took forever back then. Everything had to be done by hand. I just want to point out that I've been sitting here for 2 hours, and I now have, for 2 baby dresses, 2 entire skirts done, and 2 sets of sleeves done. Less than half a day's work. It's just a couple hours work. And by half a day, there's no reason why I can't get 2 entire baby dresses done. Sitting here and doing regular stuff too. Like I've been taking care of basic needs, eating, cooking, that sort of thing as well. So it doesn't take as long as people think it does. I'm going to mark halfway. I am going to cut 2 backs and a front, only because my options are cutting a slit to put the sleeves in or cutting the whole thing in and doing a mantua maker's seam. And I kind of like the idea of just cutting it. I find that even when they're really full like this, there still usually is a side seam on originals. Mantua maker's seam, which I know we've done on the channel once or twice, well, essentially a felled seam that's done on 1 seam instead of 2. And that gives us a very nice seam. One thing I also need to do is sew up a gathering thread on the top and the bottom of the bodice, but that's when, of course, I get the other sleeve in. This is a selvage, so all I have to do is turn it over once. I don't even have to sew it. It can just stay like that and be ironed down. It'll be fine. I see that a lot on originals. With the other one, of course, especially with that 1 seam that is not a selvage, I will have to fold it over twice, sew it down, just to keep that raw edge from doing anything. We're wrapping the project up, so sleeves are now in. We're working on putting on bias at the top and bottom, and this is just a casing through which we're going to put a tape, and that will of course draw up the neck and waist for a slightly smaller child. So I put the waist and neck around 22-21 inches. Most newborns average about 18 inches in the chest and waist, about 18 to 19 inches. So that's going to give me plenty of wiggle room for larger babies. It should be able to fit them all. It's one thing I really like about the mid-19th century is how long children can wear outfits. We have it today where we have everything so fitted and sized that you're having to change sizes every couple of weeks almost. A newborn to 3 months, and sometimes by the time they're 2 weeks old, they can't even fit into those, and you're having to use your 6 months clothes. And here the Victorians are like, well, this child can wear the same dress for an entire year. All I gotta do is when they start walking, shorten the skirt. So now this is going to get sewn down on the other side, just whipped down. I've been working on these for 5 hours now. Well, no, 6 hours. But again, I cooked myself 2 meals in between that, regular household things. So it hasn't been a full 5 hours. And again, completely hand-sewn using period techniques. And I'm not saying that everyone should be able to accomplish this or that you're not a good seamstress if you can't do it in that time. I'm merely trying to highlight the point that, especially people who don't sew, who like to think that it took forever to do things by hand, and that's just not the case. In the same breath, they'll often tell you that everyone back then were good seamstresses, and it's one of those things where I just want to look at them and go, you can't have it both ways. It either took a very long time to hand sew, or they were good seamstresses, or they were all extremely talented and good at seamstresses. You really cannot have it both ways. Same thing with people who say things like, oh, surgery was so bad back then that, they really didn't do a lot of surgeries because everyone died in surgery. And then they'll turn around and go, oh, but women had their ribs surgically removed to fit into their corsets better. And it's like, well, which is it? Is everyone dying in surgery because of poor medical practices, or are women having their ribs surgically removed? If everyone's dying in surgery, the women going into the surgeries aren't going to come out with ribs surgically removed. They're going to die. You cannot have it both ways. And I don't think we realize until we start studying history how many of those beliefs that we have that may or may not be rooted in truth that are completely contradictory with other beliefs that we hold about the same time period. And it's not all hard work either. I have a lot of people who like to lament about original garments to me going, oh, all that work. And I'm like, it really isn't. And if you look at original garments, you quickly realize that they weren't very thorough and they made a lot of shortcuts, which I really appreciate. Gauging going into the waistband. I only did one gauging thread this time. I usually like to do two, but a lot of the originals only have one, so I'm trying to teach myself that it's okay to only do the one. And it's actually working out a lot better than I thought it would. I know a lot of the sewing manuals will tell you to do 2 rows of gauging, which does make sense, but sometimes things that are recommended by the professionals isn't always what makes it into common practice, because people are lazy, or at least have better things to do with their time. And this is just 1/4 inch twill tape. I really want to find 1/16 inch twill tape, or even 1/8 inch. I can't seem to. I found one source in England, and it was really expensive to get over here. So I was like, I don't care that much. One of them done. I gotta put the skirt on the other one, but little 1840s dress. So I think they turned out absolutely adorable. This is my favorite time period of little kids' clothes. I'm a huge fan of the little tiny fitted sleeves. I'm not a big fan of the giant poofy sleeves on myself. I am a big fan of giant poofy sleeves and giggle sleeves on toddlers, but not necessarily on babies either. So like, this is my jam. I love this. I love full gathered bodices. I think they're adorable. I love tiny little sleeves like that. This is exactly what I like, and I think I'm in love with that print gown. But the general shape of baby dresses doesn't really change all that much. Anyway, I am completely thrilled with them. I obviously like the print one a whole lot better. I think for the 1850s and 60s, we're going to do 2 print ones instead of the print and then the plaid. I think doing 2 print ones, because I have so much print to get through. And it will get used. Toddler stuff, little child stuff, it'll all get used. But let's go ahead and start doing some really fun reproduction prints. Because one of the beautiful things about the mid-19th century is the prints that they had. And regulating ourselves to plaids and stripes, although I like them, and they are much easier to get right in terms of, it's hard to learn how to date fabrics. And a lot of plaids can be right for certain time periods, and so they're easier to pick out. But again, one of the most beautiful things about the mid-19th century are their prints. And let's go ahead and start showcasing those a little bit more here on the channel. Anyway, if you've enjoyed the video, please like and subscribe to the channel. Click the little bell notification so you're notified anytime I upload a new video. And as always, have a fantastic week, and I'll see you back here in the next video.